Thanks a lot. So can everyone hear me? Okay, excellent. So welcome everyone, and this is our first ever live Q&A. My name is Jaime Parga. I'm the marketing manager of iToo, and I will be your host today. I'm talking to you guys from Cádiz, southern Spain. It's where iToo headquarters is. And along with me today, I'm talking from Canterbury, UK, is my colleague, Paul Roberts, which, as you know, is iToo frontman and world-renowned ArchVS star. So again, welcome to our event. We all hope you guys are all fine in such difficult moments. And well, the aim of this session is to establish a conversation with our users, basically to solve tech questions mainly. But of course, if you have any kind of questions not regarding to the technical side, we will be happy to answer. So we'll ask you to please drop your questions in the chat box that we have here. And by the way, for the Spanish audience, buenas tardes a todos. The idea is to do the same thing in Spanish within a few weeks. So before I pass on to Paul, just a couple of updates. As you know, we did release RailClone 4 October last year. That was last major release we did, and it's been quite successful. We got some great feedback on that one. And the big news for this year is that we almost have ready the new version of ForcePack, which will be ForcePack 7. ForcePack, by the way, is going to be 20 years old this year, which is an amazing milestone. And we are planning on releasing ForcePack 7 before summer. There's new features, big news. There will be big improvements in things that you guys have been commented that you were not enjoying that much. And then we should have RailClone new major release for autumn. Meanwhile, in the middle, we keep releasing libraries from our 3D Garden range, which are a new range of plants and trees, and we'll be doing minor updates and bug fixes with the maintenance plans. So nothing else. Again, this is our first time, so guys, be patient if we screw up. And I'm passing on to my colleague Paul. So Paul, please.
Hi. Hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. Just a little word about what I'm going to do here today. So the idea of this is a Q&A, obviously, and what we've done is we've harvested some of the questions that people have asked us over the last week or so, and we're going to go through a few of the answers live with you. Normally, of course, I do this as a recorded thing, so there's no two-way street. But this is unusual in that you can actually ask us questions. There's a slight delay, but not much. So if you've got questions about what we're doing or related questions or really anything at all, then please just drop them in the chat next to YouTube and we'll try and answer them for you. So like I say, this is about some questions we've been asked lately, and if we continue to do more of these, then please feel free to let us know the questions you have, and in the following event, hopefully we'll be able to answer them for you. So I'm going to make a start with a RailClone question. So the question we got asked quite recently was how to stack up shipping containers in a 3D array with randomisable height. So really this is a question about how to create 3D arrays with RailClone and how you can use these arrays to randomise the heights. And this gives me a good excuse to talk about the ability to nest generators, which is something you can do in RailClone 4. So I'm going to show you quickly how to do that, and I'm just going to switch to my 3ds Max screen, and hopefully you can see now 3ds Max. So I'm going to start pretty straightforward. I'm going to open a new RailClone object, and I'm going to just open the style editor in the top here. So there's obviously a 1D array, which is the nice easy array that most people who are new to RailClone find quite straightforward, and there's the 2D array. People find that less straightforward. There's not a 3D array. The good news is that you can build 1D and 2D and 3D arrays all from the linear L1S. So actually this may even be a simpler way of creating 2D arrays sometimes and more intuitive for people. So I'm going to get started by adding one of these in, and then I'm going to add the shipping container from the scene. I'm going to wire it to the default input. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to set a spline to this size, because what I'm doing with this array is I'm creating a stack, a single stack that goes up in the air, and this is what will be randomized. So I'm just going to give it a bit of size, 2,500 centimeters for example. You can see it's popped up over here. Okay, so another thing I'm going to do is, this is a pretty high poly piece of geometry, as you can see, and I don't really want this to be sliced or bent, because it's going to, you know, create a lot of, it's not going to be optimal. So I'm going to turn off slice and I'm going to turn off bend. There we go. That's going to run a little bit smoother for me now. So what you'll notice is that it's running end to end, and that's because I haven't reset the X-forms here really. So one of the things that we should always make sure we do is align it in the way that we want it to travel along this array. So I think I've said before in various tutorials, but this part of the array here is considered the x-axis, and the world's x-axis is currently going this way as well. So you can see this is currently this way, so I haven't reset the x-forms. What I need to do therefore is to reset the x-forms so that it's aligned correctly. The other thing I'm going to do though is I'm just going to rotate it on its side, because remember this is going to be a stack. So although at the moment it's laying down flat, what I'm going to do is rotate it so it turns vertical. And to save me fiddling around in RailClone changing the rotations, I'm going to do it before I add it to RailClone. Excuse me, just clicked the wrong button. There we go. So I'm just going to rotate it over onto its side 90 degrees. I'm going to come in here, effect pivot only, and align the pivot to the world, and then just to be safe I'm going to reset X-forms. So that's looking a bit more promising. So now you can see there's a vertical, sort of a stack going along there like so. Put it back into clay mode. Right, so carrying on. So this creates a one-dimensional array. What we really want to do though is create a two-dimensional array from these. So what we can do in RailClone 4 is I can take the output of this generator and pipe it directly into another generator. And I'll give this a little bit of size too. Same size in fact. Now at the moment, nothing much is happening because this length of this was 2,500 centimeters and the length of this is, so I've just basically filled in the same size. But what I can do is to add a transform modifier here, and then I can start to rotate it. So maybe I can bring it this way. Or maybe I can do this. There we go. So now I've got a stack of, why can't I remember the name of them? Shipping containers. Shipping containers, a two-dimensional stack of shipping containers working for me there. So that's created my 2D array, and you can see in some ways this is easier to deal with than it would be to put it into an array 2S and deal with all the various inputs and that kind of thing. It's really just about understanding how you need to rotate these things. Like so. So now we can create a three-dimensional array from this by piping it in again into a default input. Let's give it the same size again, why not? And then we need to just rotate it again so that it's not going the same way. So let's try and rotate it like that. There we go. So you can see I've got a 3D array now. And the graph is simple, right? It's just one array piped into another, and at each point I've just rotated it. So that's pretty straightforward, and it's vertical and everything is working well. But if you can remember, the specific question was how do I randomize the height? So for that we need to know which one of these arrays is generating the height here, is creating the stack, and if you remember that was the first one. So what we need to do in order to randomize that height is export the X size for this generator, so just the size of this generator, and then I can take a random parameter, I can take this and pipe it into the X size and give it a value in scene units, so let's say it's 1,000 to 3,000, and then change generate on to generator, or let's try another one. Ah, it's working well. There we go, that works. There you go, so a bit of trial and error there. But you can see now I'm randomising the height of each one of these stacks, and all I need to do to change that is to change these values here. So that's a bit high, right? That looks a bit precarious. There we go, it's a bit more like it. Also, maybe these are a little bit too close together, so we can treat these like they're segments, and we can add a bit of padding between them if we want. So we could add a little bit of a gap between them, like so in that one. So I've added a little bit of gap there, and I could do the same in depth just with this transform operator. There we go, a little bit of space between them. And you could even randomize the rotation if you wanted to. So we could add a little bit of noise to the rotation, just coming into the transform settings for the segment and coming into rotation, and then we'll rotate. Let's try. We'll try and error. Trouble is when they're rotated like this, it's hard to work out which axis to do. There it is. It's the Y. So you can see now I've added a little bit of randomization just to bring that to life, so nothing quite meets up as perfectly as it did before. The crane drivers have been kind of sloppy on their job here, and made this a little bit more precarious than it probably should be. So that's the solution for creating a 3D array to stack up your containers in RailClone. And the graph, as you can see, not too complicated, but takes advantage of RailClone 4's ability to nest one generator inside of another. Okay, so I'm going to pause there just for a second and see if there are any questions that relate to this case. Jaime, anything to report?
Well, meanwhile, just to answer some of the comments I see on the chat box.
Sure.
So Ole Post is asking, are there any plans to make RailClone for Blender? The answer is not at the moment. We are sticking with Max. We have to say that we are playing with both Unreal Engine and Unity, but our main DCC will remain Max by now. There's more questions about RailClone libraries. I forgot to mention that along with the new version of RailClone, which will come out in Q4, we are working on commercial libraries. The first one will be parametric buildings to be used with RailClone, and that should be released with RailClone as mentioned in RailClone 4. I mean in Q4, sorry. There's a few technical questions, Paul, if you can take a look at the chat. Yeah,
I see that Mikhail has answered a few, but this chat disappears afterwards. So one of the questions was, is there going to be any improvement in the support for instancing in Corona? And I'm guessing you're specifically referring there to some of the features which aren't currently present, like UVW randomization, that kind of thing. So there's a difference in the way that we support Corona and V-Ray. Basically, V-Ray has an API that means we can write features directly for it. Corona, on the other hand, has to use our API, and they have to implement support for Forest Pack and RailClone in their engine. And that puts a certain amount of limit on what some of the things, just what's possible in some cases. But as Mikhail has answered in the questions, for example, the use segment material feature, which was in RailClone 4 and was going to be a huge time saver, that has been implemented by the guys at Corona, so you will see that soon. You're also going to see more feature parity in Forest Pack 7 between V-Ray and Corona for those few things that are missing from Corona at the moment, so you can look forward to that. I think that's probably the only technical question, unless I've missed one there.
Iceman Blue is asking, for people like me who do not have a lot of programming knowledge, it would be very useful to show practical examples of using expressions, attributes such as segment, X, roll, array counter.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, we'll take care of that in some more tutorials. I think there may be a little bit of it in some of the examples. One thing I would mention is that a lot of the time the digging into expressions puts people off a little bit. So you bring up your expression, open your expressions editor, and you're faced with this. And if you're not, I mean, it's not programming, but if you're not familiar with just using some sort of text-based thing to extract variables, it can be a little bit intimidating. We understand that. So one thing that I've done, and I'm not sure it's public yet, but it will be soon, is I've added the variables as a macro, right? So you don't have to dig into expressions. So this will be available soon. And basically what it means you can do is you can just click on which of the variables you'd like to export. So if I wanted to use X-spline length, instead of having to write an expression for that, I can just tick this little box here. Or if I wanted to use material ID, I can tick it. And you see array counter is there as well, for example. So I can tick that and that will export array counter. And then you can use those. So that I think that's just a slightly simpler approach to using expressions for people who aren't familiar with them. And of course, if you want to dig into expressions, you still can.
I'm seeing here Adriano
I'm
Yola.
not showing you the right thing. I am sorry. That was my fault.
No big deal. Adriano Yola, if you guys don't mind me using Spanish for a minute. Adrián, la idea es desarrollar contenido en español. Estamos trabajando en ello y en breve habrá tutoriales y documentación específica en español. Porque además entendemos que es un mercado interesantísimo y además, pues siendo españoles, merece la pena. Así que that was one. Mohsin is asking, how can I learn iToo? Well, you guys know that, well, Paul, as you all know, is the voice of our tutorials. Mokti, you can jump in our website. I think we might be the company in the industry delivering more tutorials at the moment. So you get plenty of information and documentation in our website. And there's free light versions, of course, for all of you guys that want to try the software.
Cool. Just to recap the little bit that I missed a minute ago because I wasn't showing the right screen.
Oh.
I'm just getting the hang of this still, so bear with me. This is the macro I was referring to. It's X-spline variable. It's a bit of a tease to show you it because I don't think it's public yet, but it won't be long. And you won't have to wait for a major release. But basically all it does is it just, instead of having to write an expression, it just gives you a tick box option. You can only tick one, obviously, and it will just output that particular variable so you can use it in your graphs without having to basically go into the arithmetic operator, go to expression, and then find the attribute you're looking for from down here. It's just a little time saver, and hopefully it will help those people that are not so comfortable with using expressions.
I have the feeling we have more questions about RailClone than ForestPack at the moment.
I think there probably generally are more questions about RailClone than ForestPack.
Okay.
I think that's often the case. Okay. Are there any more before I move on? I don't think so. No. Okay. So let's go to the next question we had recently. And this was one on our forum. It was how to create flower beds and control the planting based on the distance from the border. So in this example, you can see at the front you have the sort of red and blue flowers. In the mid area from distance from the border we've got these larger pink ones, and at the back we've got these larger bushes, and it kind of reflects a common planting pattern, I think, where you will often see the plants tier up in height the further they are from the front of the border. We had a bit of fun with this one. So this was, like I say, a post on our forum, and it seems like Mikhail, Rokas and I all had a bit of a competition to try and answer it. So there's actually 3 solutions, but selfishly I'm going to show you mine. If you want to see the other 3 too, they are on the forum here. So we had Rokas suggesting you could use an open spline, which would work if the bed was of a consistent width. That would be great. So you can see that there. And we had Mikhail suggesting that you could use the ability that ForestPack has to basically pick plants based on colours on a map. So you could create a coloured map that fits over the top of your bed, and that way you could quite carefully position the types of plants exactly where you wanted. You wouldn't be limited to this idea of distance. You could actually paint the layout of the bed wherever you wanted, but the request was really for a more procedural approach, so that you could have any sized bed, any shaped bed, and the plants would always just be changing dependent on their distance from the edge. So I could sort of solve this with one of my favourite features in ForestPack, actually, probably my favourite feature, and one I use all the time for things, which is the distance fall-off settings. So I'm going to show you that setup very quickly. And just give me a second to load it. And go back here, layer beds. Okay. So I'm starting pretty basic here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and do this with one ForestPack object. That's the goal. So I'm going to add one ForestPack object. I'm going to pick this spline here to start with. There we go. Magic. So let me just come over to my 3ds Max is running a little slow because I've got streaming stuff running in the software, so do bear with me. Don't blame ForestPack. Okay, so I'm going to pick in some plants. So I haven't included any yet, so I thought I'd bring in some from the library. And what I'm actually going to do is use some from the 3D garden and go for bushes and small plants. So this is our range of plants that integrate with Forest Pack here. And what I want to take is quite a big tree, so I'm going to take this quite large one here. And I'm going to take something that's a little bit medium sized. So let's see, maybe this one, and then maybe a couple of smallish flowers. So let's take this red one and this kind of purpley one. It's okay. I'm also holding down, some people aren't even aware of this, you hold down Control to pick multiple in the library browser. It works just like Internet Explorer. Click Import Selected, and then let's just be patient for a second while it loads that, because that's a fair bit of geometry I've just asked it to import. I'm just reading through the comments while that's happening.
Paul, someone is asking if it would be quite useful to scatter lights. Are we working on that?
Are we allowed to say we're working on that?
We are working on that, guys.
We're working on that.
We are working on scattering lights.
Maybe we can show a little tease of that at some future point in one of these.
Yeah. There's people that I can see nothing for some reason. Just a picture with yeah.
At the moment, all you'll see is the library browser while it imports.
Nope.
Ah, right. Okay. Sorry. I am, as it turns out, quite bad at switching between the different screens. So apologies for that. All I've done, right, is I've created a Forest Pack object so far. I've picked this little square spline and I've loaded...
Oh, I'm afraid we are seeing the same thing.
It will catch up in a minute. Your voice is ahead of mine. So, and I've loaded a selection of plants from this 3D garden library. So I've taken one that's quite large, I've taken a mid-sized one, and a couple of flowers.
Is it on the screen?
It's coming, Jaime.
Just a minute, guys, we're fixing it. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got my plants in here now, and you can see they're color coded, so that makes them a little bit easier to see. So I've got two quite small plants, a medium-sized one and a large one. What I'm going to do, first of all, is show you one feature, which I think, again, not so many people are aware of, but that's the fact that you can limit what you're scattering from that list of geometry for each individual area. So for this area here, for example, I can come into Select Models, I can go to Pick, and I can choose what I want to actually scatter, just in this one area. So for example, I only want to scatter the small plants in this area. So I'm just picking these two, the two lilies, and I'm going to click OK. So now you can see I've just got the small plants there. And now what I can do now I've got the small plant is I can adjust the distribution for the smallest plant in this scatter. Because I can adjust this distribution later, I can make it more sparse, but I can't make it more dense. So I'm just going to bring this down, and I might just, that's fine actually, I'll just bring these in so there's a bunch of quite dense plants there like that. So you can even see from this points cloud that the repetition is going to be kind of obvious at the moment because I'm only using two different plants. So I'm going to come into transforms, I'm going to randomize rotation, and I'm going to randomize scale, and I'm going to take the minimum down just a little bit further just to exaggerate that. Nothing fancy going on there, just a bunch of flowers. Okay. So good. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward so far. So what we want to do now is we want to add this area two more times, sorry, but it's going to be 3 times in total. And each time I add it, I'm going to use the same technique to limit the plants that are being displayed in each area. So I'm going to add this rectangle another time. There we go. And this time I'm going to select models and I'm just going to pick this mid-sized plant here, which is pinky color. And click OK. There we go. So this is a lot bigger plant, but it's using the density from the small plant. So as you can see, it's just like solid. There's too many of them. What I can do is per area, I can adjust the scale of the distribution map, right? And this is only going to affect this area. So here I increase this scale, and you can see I can spread out these purpley plants until I get a better distribution, like so. So that solves that problem. But they're going right up to the edge. Right, and we want them to start some way back from the edge. And this is where I'll start to use this fall off density setting. So I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to add an include value. Okay, so this is the range over which we're going to be able to experiment with pushing this stuff back from the edges. In this case, I'm going to go for something like 3 meters. Okay. So what's happened now is that I've gradiated the density of these plants from 0 density here, coming up to 100% density as they go towards the middle. Now that's not really what I want. What I want to do is to control each layer separately, and in order to do that I need to change this curve. Right? So what you're seeing here in this curve is that on the right hand side here, scribble, on the right hand side you've got the outside, the border of this spline, right? And it's at this point you can see the density is down to 0. Then going along the x-axis, you've got that distance that I just entered, so 3 meters in this case. And then over this 3 meters, this is how the density changes. So it goes from 0% up to 100%. Right, that's what's happening there. So what I want to do is I actually want to change it so it's not a gradiated density, but a stepped density. And in that way, I'll be able to control it. So I'm going to add a few extra vertices there. I'm going to bring this down so it's low and this up so it's high, and then move the whole lot over. I'm basically bringing it as close to the left as I can. And if I want to be accurate, you know, I should put 0 in here for this one, and I should put 100 in here for this one. Now what I've basically told this to do now is to say the density is 0 at the boundary, and then it progresses at 0 almost all the way along to the end of this include area here, this include value here. So it's basically 0 density for 3 whole meters, which is this is smaller than 3 meters, this particular square, or 6 meters, I guess. So you can see what's happening there. So you might think, what good is that? Because this is one setting, and this setting does not change for each area, right? It's fixed. But what we've got for each area is the ability to control a percentage fall off effect here, density fall off effect. So what I can do is per area, I can control how far it pushes back from that edge. So for example, for the small flowers, I would set that to 0 because I want that to go right up to the edge. And then for the medium-sized bushes, well, I probably want that somewhere in the middle. So like that, let's add a few bushes there like that. And then if we add this area again, I click and add it again. And this time I'm going to select models again, and I'm going to choose the larger bush. There. Now it's nothing showing because of my fall off density. So I'll just reduce this down a little bit until I get some bushes in the middle there. So now I've got some bushes in the middle. Of course, these are even bigger bushes than the little pink ones. So my distribution map setting is way too dense. So I can just thin that out a little bit to get a few bushes in the middle, like so. So pretty cool, right? So now I've got my gradiated heights based on the measurement from the edge. And the nice thing is that because this is fully parametric, all I can need to do in order to add this to another bed is just connect it up, and you see the whole thing updates like so. The other cool thing about this, just for fun, is that we could use this spline to add some sort of edging around here. Now you could use RailClone for this, but I'm going to use Forest Pack, and I'm going to use one of our rock libraries. So I'm going to go into icon mode, add an icon. And the reason I'm going to icon mode here is because I'm going to use spline distribution. Spline's a path distribution, so it makes more sense to start in this mode because I'm going to have to change the distribution mode from here. Look, so I'm going to change it to path, and then I'm going to pick this same path from the scene like that. Now I can go into geometry. I'm going to go into the library, and I just wanted to point out, because again I'm not 100% sure everyone knows these things are here, but in the 3D setting, in our built-in presets that come with Forest Pack, there are a lot of photo-scanned rocks, which are very nice. So you could pick a couple of these, for example. Made by Rockass, incidentally, who's on the comments board if you want to congratulate him. Okay, so these are just loading in. So there we go. So what I've got now is rocks placed a little bit like RailClone in Forest Pack, placed along this path here. And if I go into distribution settings, I can just change the spacing to close those up a little bit. So I'll get a little bit of regularly repeating rocks. Of course, they're all the same size and the same rotation. So we'd randomise the rotation a bit and certainly randomise the scale a bit. Let's make a few of them a bit bigger. Something like that. Kind of interesting. All driven by the same spline. So if I change this one spline, both those forest pack objects are going to update. So for example, if I go to select forest area, just give it a moment. Try that again. Ah, right. Okay, no, it's fine. It does work, I promise. There we go. There we go. So you can see now that if I change this spline here, the whole lot updates, both forest objects. I can easily change the size of this, and I don't need to change anything in Forest Pack. Now it's set up, so you could save this in a separate max file and just pull it in whenever you wanted, or you could save it as a preset. Okay, cool. So there may be some questions about that. Sorry I didn't share the screen at some point, but hopefully it makes some sort of sense. I will just pause for a second to see if there are any questions that relate to this case. Anything, Jaime?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
I would say that we have another 20 minutes, so...
Okay. No, I can't see anything. Okay, cool. So I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to switch back to questions. So I'm going to switch to a RailClone question, which was asked over this week, which is openable doors and windows using RailClone. So we may do an expanded version of this, but I've kept it simple-ish for this one, in that the doors and windows are going to be of fixed size. So I've kept the doors and windows fixed size, but I'm going to show you how to make them controllable, how you open the doors and windows using RailClone markers. And how you can place them along a spline using the RailClone spline object. Okay, so let me just open this file up. I'll just switch back to my desktop. Open. Door opening tutorial. Here we go. Okay. So here's a basic setup. So let me just show you how you've set these assets up, because there's something you need to think about. So first of all, obviously, the door's a separate object from the frame. Wouldn't be possible otherwise. If you look at it from the top view here, the pivot is placed in the center of the hinge, since clearly that's where we want the door to rotate from. And for the frame itself, the pivot is just on the far left-hand side. There. Okay. For the window, slightly different, since it's not going to rotate. The window and the frame share the exact same pivot. The idea being, right, that if I were to align this based on pivot, it would snap back into exactly the right place. And that's in essence what the compose node in RailClone is going to do, right? So that's why we align the pivots. The other thing you can see here is that the window is up at the right height, basically level with the top of the door in this case, but I've put the pivot at ground level on the Z axis, and that's just to make sure we can move it up into the correct position easily. On the left here, I've also got a couple of other wall segments if we get that far. So I've got one for the window that just fits neatly around the window. I've got one that fits on top of the door, and I've just got a bit of generic wall here basically. So pretty straightforward setup. So let me show you how this works. First of all, let me add a RailClone Pro object. I'm going to open the style editor. Let's see if I can show you this all at the same time. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to use a linear array again, nothing too fancy. I'm going to add a spline. And I'm going to connect that spline to the spline input and pick the spline from the scene. Now I want to bring in these bits and pieces here. So I'll do the window first, slightly easier. So let me bring in this segment. I'm going to pick the frame and then bring in another segment. And I'm going to pick the window. Okay, there we are. So these are going to get piped through a compose operator. And what a compose operator does is basically it takes whatever segments or geometry you put into it, and it basically turns it into like a single segment that you can put into a single input. In this case, I'll put it in the start initially so we can just see it. It's got two modes though. So I'll just put this in the start so you can see what's happening. So you can see down here, just give me a bit more screen. You can see the first mode, which is a kind of a sequence. Right, so I've put two segments in one input in the start, which is useful, but it's one after the other, which in this case isn't what we want. The compose operator has a second mode, which is called grouped. And when you click on this, what it's going to do is it's going to align the pivots of both of those objects. So you can see in this case, because I took the time to align the pivots before I brought them into RailClone, it's basically snapped that window together correctly. So that's all good. And the nice thing about that is that, you know, I can change the transform on the Z-axis and open the window. Wrong one. Let's try and open the actual window. There we go. So I can open the window. Up or down. Okay. So I mentioned that that I'd set the pivot on the floor so that it would push up in the air, and that's basically not working now, and that's because it's aligned the pivots together to snap it into compose, but once you're after the compose operator, it's using the default alignment settings, which means it's going to hit the bounding box on the bottom, and in a start it's going to use the left hand side of the segment. So what I can do is override that, right? I can put a transform operator in here, and then I can come down to alignment, turn on my alignment overrides. So I can say, actually, for the Z-axis, I would like you to use that pivot that we set up. Now you see, now it's up in the air. And I'm also going to force it to use the left-hand side there too. Why? I will leave as is. It's fine. Okay, so I hope that makes sense there. So we can do the same thing for the door. So let's take the door and do the same thing. And it's more or less the same principle with a slight difference because of the way I've aligned the pivots. So I'll bring the segment in again, and then I'm going to pick the door. I'm going to bring the other segment in, and I'm going to pick the frame, and I'm going to put these through a compose operator. Compose operator. Like this. Now I'm going to put them into the start input to replace that, and you can see the same thing again. So this is in sequence mode or sequential mode, so it's one after the other. What I'll do instead is change it to grouped mode. So now it's aligned the pivots together. Now, it's aligned the pivots, but the pivot for the door wasn't offset over to the edge of the frame for the reason that when I rotate around it, otherwise it will kind of rotate around the wrong place. So what I need to do instead is I'm going to add a transform operator to do this actually, just to keep things neat and tidy, because I know I'm going to animate it later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the translation around a little bit so that we can move this into the correct position. So you can see I'm just changing the door's position until I get the hinges to align again. Like so. Okay, just approximately. So that's put the door in the right place, and the reason I'm doing it like that is that now I can change the Z rotation and I can open the door around that hinge. Don't worry about the fact it's moving for now. I'll fix that in a second. But you can see I can open this door now. So you might wonder why is it moving around like that? And that's because of the thing that I just said a minute ago. You know, after this compose operator, even though I set it to pivot here, after this compose operator, it's using what's considered the default alignment settings, which for a segment is the center of the bounding box and the left-hand side for the start, or it's the left-hand side for the start and generally. So that's why it's moving all around. If I add a transform afterwards, override those alignment settings and change X to pivot, and then change Y to pivot, and then don't really need to do Z in this case, but I'll change it too. Now you can see it's locked to the start of that spline, and even if I open that door, nothing moves. Okay, so I've got a window and a door set up ready to go there now. What we want to do is to put these on markers instead of putting them in the start here. So what we'll do is I'm going to put a selector operator in, and what this lets me do is to choose between multiple inputs based on various things like a numeric index. You can do it based on material ID, but you can also do it based on spline marker ID. Okay, so that's an ID that we can set in the RailClone spline modifier that we'll look at in just 1 second, but just remember that that's what I've done. I'm going to put the window in the first input, and I'm going to put the door in the second input. And then I'm going to wire it to the marker input on the array. Nothing will happen because there are no markers on this array yet. Okay, so you can see it's just a line. But if I come up now to the modifier list and find RailClone spline here, what I can now do is to add a marker on that spline. And you've got a few ways of doing this. So I can add one just by clicking on this little plus button, and it'll add one to the list. You can see I've got a window there now. And then I adjust its position on that spline using this percentage. So if I wanted it smack in the middle of the spline, well, hello, how did I do that? Interesting. Anyone who can help me to not undo what I just did is would be grateful. Right, my shortcut for this doesn't work. So I've gone into expert mode, but I'm clearly not expert enough to get out of it. So how do I fix this?
Mikhail says Control X.
Yeah, you'd think, but apparently not in 2020.
Oh, people is saying things in the chat. Alt X.
No, my shortcuts aren't working for that.
Yeah,
well,
we got a bunch of Alt X.
Yeah, it's not Alt X. I don't know if it's I don't know if my shortcuts are messed up. Neither of those work, or if this is a max 10 to anything. Do you know what I'm going to do? No, I don't even do that.
Press Control X.
Yeah, I know it's supposed to be Control X. I've tried that a million times, but not in this case. Oh, this is silly. Alt Control and X apparently. Alt Control and X, guys. In 3ds Max 2020, I've learnt that expert mode is Alt Control and X. So there you go. We've all learnt something now, but I particularly have learnt something. Okay, so yeah, so what was I saying? So percentage is 50%, for example, puts it smack in the middle of the spline. But you can also go in and do this much more intuitively by going to the markers sub-object and just moving the thing around with your mouse. Okay, so you can move it around. So if you remember, there was that marker ID selector that I set up a minute ago to help me choose whether it's a window or door. Well, that is here in the user data, ID 0. If I switch to 1, I get my door. If I switch it to 0, I get my window. The other thing you can do is to add objects just by clicking on the spline. So if I wanted multiple windows, I can click this little button here, and then I just click anywhere on the spline. I want a new window. Pretty straightforward. And then, of course, we can come back and change a few to a door if we want, just by changing the ID. So this is a really powerful layout tool. Really powerful. So what about opening them, since that's what I promised? To open them, all we need to do is access the user data in the spline modifier. So you can see next to this here, I've got user data, and I've got 9 channels of user data. So I could call this one, for example, door. I'm just going to keep it simple so we know what they are. And then call this one window. Window. And what we can do, that's just for reference later, what we can do now is use these to drive the various attributes inside this graph. So, for example, this is the door here. And what I can do is change the rotation of this door by exporting it. export, fixed transforms, fixed rotation, Z, like so. And then I can use the data in that to drive that. So a little bit earlier, someone asked about expressions, and this is an example of where you can use one. So I can bring in the arithmetic node, pipe it into there, click on expression, and click on edit expression to open it up. Now, this is going to be a simple one because all I really want to do is output a variable. But the first thing you need to know is that to output, or to tell the expression what to output, you type return. So anything that follows this is going to come out of this and into whatever you've got it wired into. Just type return. For most other things, you can have a hunt through and see what it is you're looking for. So for example, I know I'm looking for X marker, and I specifically want X marker data. So I just double click on that. I don't need to remember it. And there's a little description down here which tells me which of those data's variables do I want to use, and you pick them by adding a square bracket and then choosing them by number, 0 to 8. And then you put semicolon to finish. Okay, and then hit evaluate. That should pretty much be it. So in theory, I'm crossing my fingers, if I change this value here, it should open the door. Doesn't. That's because it's not a door. Okay, there it is. So, you can see, opens the door with this variable now on the spline modifier. If I were to pick a different marker, and you can pick them using your mouse as well, so I can select down here, I can open this one too. Here we go, so I can open this door. So at the moment this is reading as a negative, just the way the rotation works. If I didn't like that because it's not intuitive, I could very easily just come back to my expression, which is here, and add a negative in front of that data, that variable, and I've just reversed it. And in that way, I can just use values that make more sense to me here. So I can just use 45 here, and this one here too, like so. Okay, so that's the principle, right? Each one of these can be controlled now using a marker. I don't need to go into RailClone or anything like that. It's very straightforward. Windows, the same thing. So we can just come into the window. I can add a transform node for the window sash. Export a parameter. In this case, it's going to be the Z translation. Like so. And this time I'll use that macro I showed you earlier. So I'll go to logic, array attributes, spline variables, and I'm going to turn on mark data, and I'm going to hit data channel 1, and I'm going to pipe that into there. So that just saves me using the expression. Now I can come back to here, back to the spline itself, pick a marker that's got a window on it, and then in theory, if I put a negative value on this, it goes downwards, interestingly, so the window sinks. That's an interesting one. I'll look into that in a minute. Oh, I've probably wired it to the wrong thing. Yeah, I have. That's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. It's just about making sure that you've got the transform node connected to the right part of the compose. So now that'll work. So you see, this is the beauty of doing things live. You get to see me correct my foolish errors. There you go. Now it works. Right. So now each one of these can have a different setting if you want. So I can have the windows open different values easily enough. The other thing that's interesting is that these can be animated. So I can turn on auto key and I can animate them as much as I want. You can also animate the position of the markers too. So these position of these can be animated, moving around. So you can do quite a lot with it. And the cool thing is, once you've got it set up, of course, you can just reuse this kind of thing again and again. All you need to do is to change the markers on the base spline. So here, example, I'll just pick this spline from here, which I think has some stuff set up on it already. Yeah, there you go. It's got the marker things the wrong way around, but there you go. So say I wanted to add the walls to this, just to finish this a little bit up. What if I want to add the walls? Well, to do that, I'm going to come into the style editor again. And instead of trying to mash them into this particular generator, I often like to split up my styles across multiple generators. So I'm going to add another generator, I'm going to add the spline there to the same one, and then I'm going to pick these various bits and pieces from the scene. So I'm going to add the wall first of all and just put that in the default input. That will go right through the whole lot. Then I'm going to add the window wall, which has got a gap for the window, remember? And I'm going to add the door wall, which is this one here. And I'm just going to use that same selector operator technique that we did down here to choose it, tell it which one to use. So I'm going to tell it to use X spline marker ID and wire it to the marker input. So you might think, what's going on there? A couple of things. First of all, this particular segment is up in the air, which means it's using the bounding box to put it on the ground. So obviously what we need to do there is to tell it to use the pivot to push it back up into the air. So that's right. And the other thing is that I use the left-hand side of these to align them to the spline, and currently it's using the default, which is the center. So if I switch this to left, everything moves into position. And there you go. So now this whole thing, including the walls, is controlled with these markers, which is pretty cool. Okay. Which hopefully answers a question about opening openable doors and windows using RailClone. A more advanced version of this, like I say, is to make these windows resizable. That would probably take one of these live Q&As all on its own. But maybe we'll do that in a more organised tutorial a little bit later. Any questions? I imagine there might be.
There's a few of them. I would say that we got 4 more minutes. We could extend this maybe another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I didn't have a time limit in mind, to be honest. So whatever people want.
Our idea was to do this
If
within...
people are still watching and interested, then I can keep going. If people have had enough, then I'll stop.
I would say that we can keep it within an hour, maybe extend it.
Okay. I have no idea how long I've been talking already. So
you've been talking for almost an hour right now.
Have I? Wow.
You can talk about this for so long. So
yeah.
So
no
let's check the questions.
Yeah.
So there's been a few questions about Blender. As we said before, we are sticking to Max. Again, we are playing with Unreal Engine. We are playing with Unity. Big news should come out with the upcoming release of Force Pack 7. And once that happens, we can start talking about other things. But the idea right now is sticking to Max. By the way, we are a small company. For you guys that don't know, we are a small team of 9 people based in southern Spain and other parts of Europe. So our development capacity is limited, and Max is what we do. So okay.
So I can see some questions from Steve Tierney. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That seems like quite an in-depth one, probably not one I can answer on the fly, but it could make an interesting one for a future Q&A. So please feel free to let us know that.
Exactly. By the way, some of the questions that you guys are dropping in the list and are not being answered, we will pick up then in order to organize a new session in a few weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting through, yeah. So, okay, good. Thank you, people, for saying that my errors were okay. That's very kind.
So there's a question. I'm trying to write an expression to extract a 2D array.
Yeah, that's one I think I'll need to answer in more detail, perhaps.
Okay.
What about a new null segment in object section for counting termination spacing purposes? The object section. So, yeah. So one thing that was added quite. Let me switch you back. One thing that was added kind of quietly to one of the RailClone releases, probably RailClone 4, is the ability to use the transform operator as a null segment, right? So for those that don't know, a null segment is just a segment that has no object attached, no actual geometry. And you can use it for 2 reasons. If you put a null segment in a, let me just do this for example. If I put a null segment in the array, it will kill the array at that point. So for example, here I've got this box repeating. And if I put it through a sequence and the second segment in the sequence is null, kills the array at that point. And the reason for that is because this has 0 size, and if we were to try and repeat it and calculate that, you'd get an infinite loop, and Max would crash. So that's the way it has to be done. The other reason for using a null array is that you can create gaps in your array. So where I've got a null segment, where I've got a null here, if I gave this a size, what I'd end up with is a gap between the segments. Okay, so this is a null. From RailClone 4, don't crash. Ah! So from RailClone 4, you can use those transform nodes too without a segment attached. And the reason for that is so that you can add null segments inside a macro without you having to attach a null segment to the outside of the macro to make that work. So basically it builds null segments into the macro. It just makes it that little bit more user-friendly. Called macros are a bit more an advanced topic, and maybe people aren't using them. Be interested to know actually who's using macros. But that is why we added transform as a null segment. So that might be of interest to people. I've forgotten what the original question was, but hopefully that answers it. Okay, I'm just waiting for Max to load up again.
Paul, since we have limited time, maybe while Max comes back to life, 15 seconds tour through tutorials and documentation, so people are aware that there's a lot of material.
Yeah, sure.
To take a look at. So
we can take you back to the desktop. Okay. Yeah, so it's our website. So we've got plenty of stuff that you can learn RailClone specifically, if that's what the questions are about. But if you go to the tutorial section, there's I think there's over 150 tutorials or something like that now. So plenty of it. But you can organize it by level. So if you know you're just starting out, do feel free to just start looking for basic tutorials, basic RailClone tutorials, or basic Forest Pack tutorials. And there's tons and tons of stuff there. In addition, if you go to our documentation, which is docs at iToosoft.com, for RailClone specifically, there are 2 books, which is Getting Started with RailClone and Next Steps with RailClone, that will take you through the fundamentals of RailClone. It's a good grounding into understanding how RailClone thinks. Because once you've understood how RailClone thinks and what it's doing behind the scenes, you can really master it. So both of those will help you out, even if you dip in and out of them. A lot of the principles are covered in the tutorials too, but if you prefer a written version, then here it is. So there's that. There's also on the website a few case studies, which are here. Some of which are kind of quasi-tutorials too. So for example, this blur one is a tutorial on creating parametric roads. And you might not find it because it's not in the tutorial section, but that's well worth having a look at. And it's kind of similar in its approach to the thing I showed earlier with the layered flower beds. Excuse me. So that's well worth checking out. We've also got a gallery, so you can see what other people are up to. And if you've got nice work you'd like to see featured, we'd love to get some off of you and show it. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink. Does that just about cover it, Jaime?
Yep.
Cool.
Thanks for that. So I would say we have 5 more minutes.
5 minutes, I can do a couple of quick questions we got asked. Okay. So not that one. Okay, so one question we got asked. Excuse me, my voice is gone. Was how to project a spline onto multiple surfaces in RailClone. I'm afraid the answer is you can't, currently. But I can show you a quick workaround, but I'm sure you can guess it. But for people that want to double check. So I've got a quick scene here. I'll just show you the issue and then how to solve it. Switch to desktop. There we go. So here I've got a RailClone object and I've got 2 surfaces here. Okay. And the reason this was asked was, that often in our scenes we might have one surface for the landscape, we might have another one for a flower bed, we might have another one for a bit of terrain of some description, or a pathway or road or something like that. And you might need to scatter something like a fence, or distribute something like a fence across all of those. But RailClone only has the ability to attach one surface, as you can see here, and there's no way to kind of combine them in RailClone yet, I should add. It's something we may be able to add, but it's a limitation at the moment. So the only real way to solve this at the moment, I'm afraid, is to combine the surfaces together. Now, you might not want to do that and lose the editability of each surface, so I would suggest at this point, using the dreaded booleans, you can use a compound object and convert it to one of Max's standard booleans. In the newer versions of Max, the boolean tool's much nicer. So we can add this. I'm just going to change to attach because I don't want it to actually process this geometry. I just want to combine them together. So I'm just going to change the mode to attach and then add this second operand. And then you can see now that the fence is now following both of these surfaces. So that's the way I would currently do it. And the nice thing is that you can still go in and if you pick the surface from the booleans list, you still get the ability to make changes to the surface. So I can remove that noise modifier, for example, from that surface, so I can switch back to the other one and make that noise a little bit more aggressive. It's a bit slow, but it works. Okay, so that's the kind of solution at the moment. And one final question we got asked this week was an interesting one. Someone had asked if they could render each tree separately so that you can move them around in post-production. So it's an interesting question. I mean, I haven't got an answer for that. That is yes. But I also thought it's an interesting approach. If you had a scene like this with 1,000 trees, I can only imagine that rendering each tree separately would be such a substantial increase in rendering times that it would be easier to move the individual tree and render it again. But it did make me think that might be worth reminding people that there is the ability to move individual trees, because sometimes people aren't aware that the items editor mode is even there. So I just wanted to just point it out and just show you a couple of things for that. An old scene, I'm afraid. Here it goes. Told you it was an old scene. Okay, so this forest object here is currently when it picks it. Yeah, so it's currently in generate mode, so I can adjust the density and stuff like that. And this is, how we mostly use Forest Pack. But there comes a point when either you or your client says, well, could you just move that tree a little bit to the left, or could you change something in the foreground, or, tweak something around a little bit? And that's when you might want to use this other mode, which is in the items editor rollout. Basically, switch to custom edit, accept that, and no. And what you can now do is go into a kind of tree sub-object mode, and you can drag trees around. So now I can move the individual tree.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think you have to switch screens.
Every time. I will, at some point, I will get used to doing that.
Once again, guys, this is our first live Q&A.
Time.
So apologies for the...
I need like an alarm or something to tell me that I'm... Okay, thank you. So I was saying this is in generate mode, right? Which is how we do most things, so we can change the density and stuff parametrically. But there comes a point where, at some point, your client or you will want to customize this on a tree-by-tree basis. And that's where this custom edit mode in the items editor comes in. What it lets you do is to pick individual trees, or pick the ground in this case. Let me try that again. Pick individual trees, and then move them around one at a time. So you can really position them exactly where you want them. And of course you can rotate them too, and you can scale them down and just put them wherever you want. So this is really, really handy because it lets you really put the trees exactly where you want. But one thing, and you can change the models too, right? So I haven't got multiple models, but you can also change the model here if you wanted to choose something else. and you can re-randomize like the rotation for a selection and that kind of thing. But one thing other people aren't so aware of is like, well, okay, what if I had put these two trees exactly where I want them, but I really wish that I could keep these two trees where they are, but randomize the density of the trees in the background again, or change the density because it's too dense. But then I'll lose my nicely placed trees, so that's kind of annoying. But there is a way around that, which is this little button here, which is detach selection. So what happens when I click that is that these trees will be exported to a separate forest pack object, which is also in items editor mode. And then what you can do in this one is you can just switch back. So if I click detach selected, that one's gone for some reason. I don't know, it's there. And then I can come back and I can go to generate mode again, and I can just lose my changes, and I keep my tree. Okay, so I kept my tree where I wanted it, but this one is now parametric again. Right, so I've placed my tree where I wanted it, and I've regained parametric control of those trees where the location or scale or whatever isn't important. So that's a really handy button down there. And the other thing you can do is that if you've got multiple trees, multiple forest pack objects and items in custom edit mode, and you'd like to just consolidate them into one forest pack object, well, you can do that too. So I can go into the items editor, and I can go for attach here. It says attach, so I could bring this tree back. So I click on single and just bring that tree back in. There it goes, eventually. So now I've got that tree back into this forest pack object. So you can split forest objects apart and you can bring them back together in items editor mode, which makes it a really powerful feature. Cool. Which I think probably brings me, if we're running out of time, to the end. I had a couple more, but we can go over them for the next one.
I would say so.
Unless there are any questions.
So 5 more minutes for questions, guys.
Yeah, ask us anything you like. Bearing in mind we're about 30 seconds behind, so
Yep.
in front, sorry. Steve says he loves the detach object button. So do I. So do I. Someone's seen a crowd sim using RailClone and Clarice. I would very much like to see that. So if anyone knows where to find that, then that would be fantastic. I've never, someone said what do you think of RailClone and Clarice? I've never tried Clarice, to be honest, so that would be interesting.
Cool.
Okay, any other questions? Any plans to improve Forest Pack performance, multi-threading? Forest Pack is multi-threaded throughout, as far as I know. There may be the odd thing, but Forest Pack is a multi-threaded application. So, but let us know which bits you think are too slow, and we'll look at it. Have we considered releasing a library with common doors and windows supporting this functionality? We have considered it. We'll let you know. I think that's back to the questions. Okay.
I would say so.
Thank you everyone for tuning in and sticking with them. Sorry about the few technical errors that were in there, and we'll sort that out for next time. But on the whole, it seemed to. I mean, we're still here, so that's a good start. Let us know between now and next time any questions you'd like to see covered, and we will happily make sure they're in the stream. And let us know if this was useful for you. It's different from the usual tutorials we do, which are, like I say, scripted and heavily edited. So this is a different approach. Do you like it? Let us know. And other than that, I don't think I've got anything more to add. Have you, Jaime?
I think it's thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rokas and Mikael, for being in the background. And thanks, everyone, for showing up. So and we hope to see you in a few weeks. We will be planning the next installment of this Q&A. I think it was a great experience being the first one. And I think we are quite satisfied with it. So nothing else. Thanks, everyone, and see you in the next one.
Yeah. See you later.
Yep. Cheers.